This is a terrarium with 2 functioning aquariums inside. But how did I get here, and did the ecosystem survive? Let's go back to the start. I had this bowl laying around for a while, and I knew that it would work for this project. The plan was to place this driftwood in the centre and attach these 2 glass orbs onto each side to house the aquariums in. I did some playing around with the driftwood to move the orbs to the correct height. In order to stop the driftwood from moving, I first tried using black silicone to attach it onto the glass. I could use a paintbrush to help spread it into areas trickier to reach. However, the driftwood kept sliding around all over the place and it wasn't curing fast enough to stabilise it. After wiping the silicone off the bowl, I removed the excess from the driftwood as well and tried to reassess my options. By wedging some lava rock in the front, I could prevent the driftwood from moving while I used a different approach to join it to the bowl. Combining superglue and tissue creates a rock-solid bond that forms in under a minute and also doubles as being waterproof. You can see smoke rising as the 2 react. This bond is also plant-safe and won't harm any of the living creatures that I'm going to put inside. I'm making sure the driftwood is joined to the glass at 2 opposite points to ensure that it's stable. I used the same method for each of my orbs to make sure that they were securely attached to the driftwood. I had to break the bond on this top orb so I could rotate it into facing the correct direction. And to hide most of the tissue from the front, I used the black silicone from earlier to paint over it before sprinkling cocoa fibre over the top to blend it in. But before I could move on, I needed to add sand into the bottom of the bowl. This will stop excess water from sitting in the substrate and allow it to drain out, preventing the roots of the plants from rotting. But the roots will still be at risk without the correct substrate, which is why I'm using a blend that retains moisture while also being fluffy and airy. And now that's in place, I added my first plant, which is this Nethriolepis fern. I'm wedging it in the back behind the orbs to fill in some of that see-through space on the back of the bowl. But without some extra substrate, the fern would likely not establish, so I added some more on top. This Pilea's got a dead leaf, so I'm going to trim it off first before I add it into the bowl. I first tried slotting it in behind the right orb, but it was a little too big and was taking up too much space, so I removed it again. Instead, I split up the plant into multiple pieces so it could be spread out across the bowl. And by using the leaf as an overhang, I could help blend the right orb into the background. In goes more substrate into the front to cover up the sand and build a medium for some more plants in the foreground. Like the rest of this Pilea that we just split up. But just adding plants would be boring, so let's mix in some Ceria stone to bring some more detail. I did experiment with adding a large piece into the top, but there just wasn't enough space, so I kept the stones down below. I saw a nice gap for the last bit of the Pilea, but it didn't have any substrate in yet, so I used this tiny shovel to help funnel in some of the substrate into the hole. The front of the bowl is looking a little too dark, so let's bring in some sand to lighten things up. I would normally go for moss around the edge of the sand, but I was running low and figured this oak leaf ficus would also do the trick. Around it, I'm placing some different Pilea and Fittonia cuttings which will root and fill in the gaps. And I'll add some more ficus onto the patches of cocoa fibre we covered up the tissue with, which will climb over the driftwood and into the top section. But it was still looking slightly empty, so these large Fittonia cuttings are perfect to fill in the gap. I'll now begin work on the orb aquariums, on which I started with aquasoil, which will provide a nutrients layer to the plants. I'll top it off with sand to seal the aquasoil in place and lighten the look of the orb. I repeated the same steps on the other side. And after it was also sealed with sand, it was time for the first plants. I'll be using dwarf baby tears, one of the smallest aquatic species, which should thrive in this setup. But before it can be planted, it needs breaking up into smaller clumps. I chose to place them near the back to create a dense vegetation in the orbs, giving room to add hardscape to the front. I went with some more Seriostone to match what we used at the front and blend the two environments together. However, while I was planting, I pushed the sand in the orb to the front and ruined the gradient, so I carefully removed where it had piled up. This left some aqua soil on top of the sand, which I also removed with tweezers. And after that, the whole thing was ready to fill up with water. The same steps with the baby tears needed repeating on the other side, and I mirrored the Seriostone used previously. Now the orbs are filled up, all the tissue we used at the start has been hidden and they blend seamlessly into the environment. But before we move on, to make the most of the water, I'll add some plants to grow hydroponically. These spider plants have been stripped to just their roots and will thrive growing out of the water. To finish the front section, I'll use some more Seriostone pieces to blend the sand into the rest of the bowl. But there were still some areas looking a little empty, which can easily be fixed with extra plant cuttings. After the planting was finished, I used deionized water to spray down the entire bowl. But I needed to wipe down all the glass following this so that excess condensation wouldn't block incoming light. I found these philodendron cuttings laying in a different terrarium, and I thought they would grow hydroponically as well and help balance the spider plants. Because their stem extends over the opening, I could use it as a sort of rod to hang the spider plants around to submerge their roots but keep the leaves above water. But it did need a little trim. Now that the main setup of the bowl was complete, it was time to add in our tiny creatures into the ecosystem to bring it to life. This is a springtail, and it will be responsible for keeping the terrarium clean and balanced. Over time, they'll populate the bowl and prevent mold and fungus outbreaks. I'll also add some floating plants into the aquarium before adding a lid and leaving the ecosystem for 30 days. At first glance, everything seems to still be alive and thriving, but it's hard to see with the condensation, so let's remove the lid and clean up the glass. The bowl was looking super good, and all of the plants seemed to have rooted and started to grow larger. I was expecting some mold to have grown on the wood, but it was looking mold free, so the Springtails must have done a really good job. All of the plants at the front have survived and began to spread out, where they will slowly fill the empty gaps. The philodendron has extended out a root across the edge of the bowl to extract moisture off the glass. The baby tears have also made some progress and are noticeably larger than when I added them in. The spider plant and philodendron have exploded roots into the aquariums and will be working to stabilise the water, helping the baby tears to grow. In the future, I'd like to add some aquatic snails perhaps, but these are obviously far too small for any fish. Whilst most of the Oakley ficus has rooted and began growing, we can see a few dead leaves on the one I placed onto the cocoa fibre and the driftwood, perhaps due to a lack of nutrients. Hopefully over time, the other plants will grow and take its place. I'd call this ecosystem a success, and all that's left to do now is put the lid back on and see what happens next.